Welcome to the Foul Play YouTube channel.
Hey everyone, welcome. Welcome to Coffee with Foul Play, Trial Tunnel Vision, and we're up to part number 6. My name is Dr. Silkman, and good morning, beautiful people, and welcome to the podcast. So good to be here. Our regular researchers today on our podcast are Bibi, Big Jeff, Kelly, Christy, Millbilly, and Obi-Wan. And today, I'd like to welcome our special guest researcher, JJax61. And on our chat today, monitoring the chat and checking out our YouTube channel and taking your questions are both Sammy and Zoe. And guys, before we start the podcast proper, all of us on the panel would like to say a big thank you. We have reached 823 subscribers, and we are so happy and so impressed. If you like what we do, please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. If you have any comments and suggestions for improvements, please let us know in the chat, good or bad. We take it on board and we try to improve and do our very best. Our Foul Play channel has had over 207,000 views, which is awesome, guys. And we appreciate that so much. And as you know, on the Foul Play channel, we upload the phone calls. A lot of this work has been done by Zoe, who uploads the phone calls. And we have Christy, who's done a lot of analysis on those phone calls. And at the moment, we have 1,370 phone calls for you to listen to. These are the phone calls between Stephen and various members of his family and other people as well. And they reveal quite a lot what's been happening in the background. I urge you guys, if you have a bit of time, to please check out those phone calls. They're very revealing, very important. Also, on the Foul Play server, we have the Thirsty for Theory Thursday. A bit of a tongue twister, but we have a lot of excellent programs there. And the recent one was with an interview done with Chad Keller. So please, guys, if you have a bit of time, check out the Thirsty for Theory Thursdays. They're very informative. Okay, guys. Well, as I said, we welcome today our special guest researcher, JJax61. JJax, can you please let us know what introduced, first of all, welcome, and can you let us know what excited you or what got you into this case? JJax.
Thanks, Dr. Silkman and everyone at Foul Play. I think that, remembering back middle of December 2015,
Yes.
my son had seen an advert for Making a Murderer, and he knew that I had a little bit of an interest in looking at the legal stuff and that kind of thing, like the legal cases and whatnot. Anyway, the series aired, and he comes home and he says, have you watched any of this Making a Murderer? And it had hit on Netflix. And
Yes.
I'm like, no. He said, you might want to check that out. So I did. And I binged watched 8 episodes straight, and I'd already been up for hours. So
yes.
then I finished it up the following day. And of course, I had, like everyone, I had a lot of questions, and I didn't immediately think to myself, well, Stephen didn't do it. Or
Yes.
I did feel that Brendan was completely screwed over, completely.
Yes. Yes.
But my biggest takeaway, a lot of people say, oh, they portrayed Stephen as this big cuddly bear, and I didn't get that. I didn't get
Yes.
that. I just felt
Yes.
like I felt like that due process was completely ignored.
Yes.
I had serious questions as to how multiple law enforcement agencies could do what they did to this guy in the midst of his federal lawsuit. That really piqued my interest.
Yes.
And then, of course, this aspect of dragging Brendan into the middle of this, I had just a million questions like everyone else. So of course I started diving in and trying to find more information, which led me. I was already on Reddit. I've been on Reddit since 2007 or 2008, but
yes.
It really drew me. That's where I really began to find. Of course, the Making a Murderer sub was already there, and there was already some discussion going. This was about a week after the series aired. So from there, that's kind of where it took off for me.
Yeah. Thank you, Jax. Yes.
Yep.
Did you happen to watch both MAM 1 and MAM 2?
Absolutely.
Yes. I mean, for me, my interest really peaked, especially after MAM 2, looking at Kathleen Zellner and the forensics and the analysis. That really got me excited. So did you, after watching MAM 1 and MAM 2, was there a particular area of interest that you were interested in, J-Jax?
Actually, probably, well, there's several. I guess
yes.
The two that really stand out is the RAV.
The RAV, yes.
The RAV to me is key. That's their golden cross of evidence because of this alleged Stephen's blood inside, which I don't believe he deposited there at all. But the RAV is key. The RAV is key. Another aspect is the bones.
Yes.
The bullet.
Yes.
The forensic testing that, I'm sorry, Sherry Culhane she's a disaster. She is a complete disaster.
I don't think you've got any hassles. I don't think you've got any problems there.
I'm being nice now.
Yes. Yes.
And how Kratz and the state were able to manipulate everyone around them.
Yes.
Seemingly without question, because I think that they were just given the green light to do whatever they wanted.
Yes, no question about that. Look, thank you, J-Jax.
One last thing.
Of course.
We know, no matter where anyone stands with guilty or innocent, no one can deny what Kathleen, the people that she hired, her experts, and that were portrayed in MAM 2. These people they're not going to stake their reputation just because it's Kathleen Zellner or Stephen Avery or Brendan Dassey. If they're going to tell you what they find, whether you like it or not.
Correct.
So everyone has to be impressed with that.
Correct. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Look, there's no question. Kathleen Zellner is not the type of person that will muck around. And she blatantly said to Stephen Avery, if you're guilty, my scientists will find that out and I'll let you know. So she's not going to stake her reputation. The experts aren't going to stake their reputations. They're going to call it as it is. Whatever they find, they'll report it. They're not going to be biased. They're not going to be skewed. If they find something that points Stephen and Brendan to the direction that they were indeed the killers, Zellner will have no hesitation in pointing that out. Stephen knows that, and he says, look, test whatever you want, do whatever you want. So, it'll be very interesting once the state finally allows Kathleen Zellner to present her case, because you've probably all heard she's been stalled yet again. So there's this continual stalling, stonewalling, obfuscation. It's been occurring now for a very long period of time. So the question is, what is the state scared? What are they holding back for? Big Jeff, do you want to make a comment? I mean, why is the state continuously doing this to Kathleen Zellner? Big Jeff?
It seems to me they have something to hide. If
Bro,
they were
really?
so sure of their case, then they'd say, let's move right on to the evidentiary hearing and give at least the appearance of justice being swift in this country, and put this to bed. Why drag it on much longer if they're so confident in their case? What do they got to worry about?
Correct. I mean, if there's nothing to hide, let's go for it. I mean, if the state is supremely confident in the guilt of both Stephen and Brendan, hey, your cases against them should be bulletproof, should be strong. So therefore, you should be able to dispel anything that Kathleen Zellner's experts come up with. So what's the problem? You have this continuously stonewalling of Kathleen Zellner to present her case in front of a judge, etc., etc. It honestly does not look good for the state of Wisconsin. But, hopefully common sense will prevail and Kathleen Zellner will get her day in court. Okay, guys. Well, welcome to the podcast. We'll make a start now on the podcast proper. And what we did is we left off at slide 195. And we can go over that quite quickly. That was talking about Sandy Greenman, who at that time was Stephen's girlfriend. And she wrote all these letters to Stephen, and Stephen wrote letters back. And they became very, very good friends, and they helped each other. Now, we know that it took quite a long time before Sandy actually met Stephen, and she was a champion for his cause, and she believed that Stephen, of course, was innocent, and the two wrote a lot of correspondence to each other. Christy, if I can ask you just off the cuff, are there phone calls between Sandy and Stephen? I haven't listened to all the calls. Are we at that stage yet?
I have not heard any at this point in time. I've also been involved in a couple other projects and have not started listening to any of the new calls we've gotten yet. But I am aware, and I've been listening for her since the first phone call. So I will let you know as soon as I hear her. And I haven't heard anybody else say, because I know there's tons of other people out there already listening, and I haven't heard that she's in there. So if somebody has heard her in there, please let us know. But as of now, no, I haven't seen her.
That'd be super. Thank you, Christy. And of course, Christy has listened to well over 800 calls and written. Is that correct, Christy?
839 last I counted. It was the first two batches. I haven't touched the third batch yet. I have some people helping me actually, because like I said, I did take on a few more projects.
Yes. And of course, both Christy and myself, we did a podcast with Linda Kay Listening. Basically, we're going through Ken Kratz's book. And if you have it, Christy, you want to make any quick comments on that one?
Yeah, we got through about a third of it on the first podcast, and hopefully we'll wrap up the rest this Tuesday evening, the 11th, at 7:30 Eastern time, 6:30 Central time, and I'm not sure what everybody else's times are, but it's 7:30 Eastern, 6:30 Central on Linda Kay Listening. Myself and you will hopefully wrap up the book that night, and I think everybody should join us. People are enjoying hearing us talk about this book.
Yes, and please check out Linda Kay's Listening channel. Excellent. Really a real casual channel, and we discuss a lot of good stuff there. Both Christy and I were doing a critical review of Ken Kratz's masterpiece, his book. And definitely worth a listening to getting into the mind of Ken Kratz. It's a scary place. Okay, guys. So if we can actually advance now, we're now to slide 196. So what we're doing now is we're entering into a new phase. Now, as you know, Brendan Dassey was arrested, put in prison basically till, I think it was, he's due for parole in 2048. and he was found guilty on various charges. One of them was for murdering Teresa Halbach. And he attracted the attention of two very important people, in my opinion, Steve Drizin and Laura Nyrider. And Brendan Dassey had requested a new trial. Now, both Stephen Drizin and Laura Nyrider, these are two big heavyweights in this game. And you can see here on slide 196, the crew interviewed Barb, who of course is the mother of Brendan, and you can see just the complete remorse and shock, the whole thing, where she states, and I quote, "They took both my brother and my son." So this is a terrible situation, remembering that Steve was falsely imprisoned for the sexual assault on Penny Bernstein back in 1985. So the family has gone through this twice with Stephen, and now, of course, you have Brendan Dassey put in prison as well. Well, this attracted the attention of both Drizin and Nyrider. And Drizin is Brendan's post-conviction lawyer. Now, why is this guy so important? Well, Steve Drizin is the co-founder for the Center on Wrongful Convictions on Youth. And he spent a lot of time, and his area of expertise is looking at wrongful conviction, especially of young people. And he stated, and I quote, "Brendan confessed to a crime that he did not commit." Now, panel, are there any comments about Steve Drizin and Nora Ryder? Guys, any comments? Why would Big Jeff? Do you have any comments?
You really have to appreciate the work that they do, because personally they opened my eyes. But before this case, I might have actually agreed with the Emperor Palpatine lookalike Attorney Fallon and say,
"Oh God,
I didn't think innocent people confessed. I really
correct,
didn't.
correct."
But they've really opened my eyes, and if we take the time to watch the confession, read Judge Wood's interpretation of the confession, see other television programs, and there's actually more and more of them on shows like Dateline, where especially mentally handicapped children just say anything to get people out of their faces.
Correct.
It's innocent people that there really was coercion there. In my mind, there's no doubt about it. And whatever we can do to help the Wisconsin Innocence Project, we should continue to do that. Yes.
Thank you, Big Jeff. Does anyone else want to make any comments about Drizin and Nyrider? Jay Jacks.
Yeah, I think that anyone that hasn't should read Brendan's 2010 motion to appeal hearings to get a sense of a lot of. I know you've read it now.
Yes, I'm going through it.
It's maddening.
Yes, it is.
So I think that anyone should read through. And there's no doubt in my mind that Brendan was coerced, seriously coerced. I think there are other people, of course, that doesn't have anything to do with Brendan, but that were not in the same category as Brendan, but were forced to do things that they really wouldn't have done. But Brendan was tricked. He was a child. And, I think that people should take a look and see the extent of what people like Laura and Steve are fighting of these people. That they'll do anything to get a conviction. That's pretty much it.
Yes. Thank you so much, Jay Jacks. And I just want to echo, I'm in the process now of reading the 2010 post-conviction interrogation sessions that were done. And And I urge everyone, if you've got the time, to really go through these. I'm at the stage where I'm reading the when Ken Kratz was on the stand, and he was questioned by Drizin. And we'll talk about this in a moment. If you really want to know what went down in the, especially in the Brendan Dassey trial, I urge everyone to have a read of the 2010 post-conviction trials. They are very, very eye-opening. And J-Jax.
What a lot of people don't understand is that what you're talking about now, a lot of the information that we got from Making a Murderer and these other areas, a lot of that came from these 2010 motion to appeal hearings that was unknown in 2007. They had no idea.
Correct.
So absolutely.
Correct.
Anyone that has time, it's 5 days worth of testimony, I think.
Yes.
Anyone that has time really should read what they did. It's terrible.
Yeah. Yes. And in actual fact, thank you, J-Jax. We'll actually be discussing some of that in today's podcast. And listeners, you're not going to believe your ears when you hear what went on. And you're correct. When you look at MAM 1 and you look at MAM 2, if you just look at the trials and what happened during the trials, you don't get the complete behind-the-scenes picture of what took place. By having an examination of those 2010 interrogation sessions, you get a much better perspective of what was happening in the background. And that was very important, especially for the state and the way Ken Kratz and his team approached the prosecution of both Steven Avery and Brendan Dassey. So yeah, if you have some spare time, definitely have a read of those interrogation sessions. The 2010 ones, they're very, very important. Okay, so guys, we can move on and we can go to slide 197. And again, one of the post-conviction lawyers for Brendan was Laura Nyrider. And she teamed up with Drizin. And here are some of the comments that Nyrider said. This was on MAM 1. I quote, Brendan's pre-trial attorney, which was, of course, Len Kaczynski, violated his duty of loyalty, and that's putting it mildly. I quote, coerced Brendan into pleading guilty, and Brendan should be given a new trial. Now, these proceedings, the motion hearing, post-conviction motion hearing, took place on January the 15th, 2010. Now, guys, if we think about it, you've got both Steve Drizin and Laura Nyrider, who are representing Brendan. And of course, these people, these lawyers are professional at what they do, especially looking at wrongful conviction of youth. And if you've ever seen the Netflix series, I think it was called On Central Park 5, you have exactly the same thing that took place on Brendan happening to these five, I think there were 5 African-American youths. It was exactly the same type of coerced confession, same read technique. It's basically designed to get a confession, not get to the truth. And if you watch that series on Central Park 5, you'll see exactly the same type of techniques that the investigators and the law enforcement agents were using that Fassbender and Wiegert used on Brendan Dassey, right? Now, Brendan Dassey was... Christy, do you have a comment?
I was just going to say that was such a tragic story. And that was honestly one of the first wrongful conviction stories that I ever looked into. I saw the documentary, I read the book. I looked into that as much as I can, what they put those 5 children through. And I say children because that is what they were. They weren't men, they were children.
Yes.
The interrogators treated them horribly. And it still happens to this day. I mean, this has been going
Yes.
on for how long now? And it still happens to this day.
Yes.
And it's just not
Yes.
right.
Yes. Um, thank you, Christy. If you haven't had a look at it, I urge you to have a look at the Netflix series. I think it was called the Central Park Five. There was it involved the Central Park Five. It involved this rape of a white female in New York City, Central Park, and it just so happened that there happened to be a whole group of people at the park at that time, and the police picked up 5 African American youths, and oh my God, what they went through. It was coerced confession. They got in prison, all got put in prison for life. And it's the same type of questions, the same type of techniques, the same type of read technique that was used on them. The same was used on Brendan. And you can see, Christy, do you have a comment?
Yes, I just went to look it up because I wasn't sure. It's actually called When They See Us.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Hey, welcome, Hillbilly. Welcome. Yes, you're right. When they see us. To me, I got what was important for me, Christy and guys, was that I got up close and personal viewpoint of the read technique. Yes, we've seen it with Brendan, but when you actually see it in operation on 5 other children, it's scary, terrifying. They use the same technique there. Millbilly, do you have any comments? And welcome.
No. Continue.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We were just talking about the representation of Brendan by Drizzen and Nyrider, and the fact that both of them agree that Brendan was coerced into a confession, and that really he needs a new trial. And I don't think any of us will disagree. But just one quick comment about the Central Park Five. The remarkable thing was this: the actual rapist was in the same prison as as I think it was 1 or 2 of the boys. He was the actual rapist was in the same prison as the youths that got falsely convicted, and the rapist went up to one of the boys and told them, "Look, you're not guilty. It was me that did the crime." And the rapist actually spoke to the prison guards, the person running the prison, saying, "Look, they didn't do it. I did it." And can you believe that the investigators did not want to believe that the rapist had confessed? They didn't believe the rapist. They thought, no, this can't be right. It was these boys that had committed this horrendous crime. Christy, do you have a comment?
Didn't we see that happen in Stephen's case when Gregory Allen said, "Hey, I did that," and Manitowoc chose to ignore it and say, "No, we have our man"?
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing. Correct. And like when you look at the analogies of the Central Park Five and what happened in the Stephen Avery Brindisi case, you can see the similarities. This rapist had actually confessed to having committed the crime of raping this jogger in New York in the Central Park. They didn't want to believe him, except when they took a DNA sample from the alleged rapist, it matched, right? So in effect, the rapist was able to give information. Now note, guys, was able to give information that only the investigators would have known, right? So in effect, they then had to eventually release the boys, but they didn't even apologize, right? The lead investigator in the case said, well, didn't want to believe that the boys weren't involved in the rape. She said, "Oh, he was the one that got away. The rapist was the 6th person that got away, and that the 5 boys still raped this woman after he had done the raping." So it's the same ridiculous mentality that when a person has confessed, shown that they've committed the crime, the investigators still want to hold on to their belief that they can't be wrong. And that's exactly what we see here, especially with Brendan Dassey, that none of the investigators want to say, look, guys, we got it wrong. We've made a mistake. So they're holding onto those confessions and the verdicts as tightly as possible. They can't admit that they've made an error. Obi-Wan, do you have a comment?
What's even crazy is after all this had come out, still not one of them from the prosecution or the state prosecuting the case that was helping out, like Linda Fairstein, who oversaw the prosecution, not one of them were held accountable for this.
Correct.
And it just seems like I just don't get it.
Correct.
I don't understand why they just escaped without, any kind of repercussion or consequences. It's just ridiculous.
Correct. And thank you, Obi-Wan. And I have an awful feeling that's exactly what's going to happen in this case when eventually the boys do get released. I don't think anyone's going to be held to account. No one's going to be held accountable here. There'll likely be other civil lawsuits, fine. But what you want is justice. I mean, the way the state attacked Brendan, attacked Stephen, they're like bulldogs and they didn't let go. And hopefully, when their sentences are overturned and they are released, whenever that happens, no one's going to be reprimanded. Yes, there'll be a whole lot of lessons to be learned, etc., etc. But at the same time, you've got both Stephen and Brendan sitting in prison. So it's all part of the legal system that takes a very long period of time. And if you could remember what Kathleen Zellner said, you need an average of around about 15 years before your case is heard and potentially overturned. And as an example, you look what happened to Ryan Ferguson. I think he was in prison for like 10 years, and there was no forensic evidence of him and his so-called friend ever being at the crime scene. It was purely based on a confession, and it turned out to be a false confession. So, Obi-Wan, do you have a comment?
I kind of wonder, like, why isn't there no one ever held accountable? Is it because if they were to be held accountable, they would have to go back into prior cases and reinvestigate? Or
absolutely. I think that's I think you hit the nail on the head there, Obi-Wan. If someone is held accountable, then potentially you can look at other cases that particular lawyer or prosecutor has dealt with, and there could well be a domino effect. Jay Jacks, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I think straight to what Obi-Wan said, if you think about this other aspect, is that let's just say an organization like the OLR that's supposed to investigate misdeeds by lawyers in Wisconsin, and what they actually do.
Yes.
It's all fine and good on the outside. The veneer looks great. But if you look at actually what they've done, they don't do a damn thing.
Yes.
So my point is that if they start holding these people accountable, let's just pick one. Let's just say Ken Kratz. The problem is that so many of these people are lawyers. So there's this built-in protection around all of them. You don't want to go. So if they investigate one, hey, we may have to investigate a bunch of ones.
Correct.
Correct. So that's it.
Correct. Well, thank you, Jay Jacks.
Another thing that they do is they do this. They resign this way. there's technically really no accountability, but they act like the resignation of these members is just enough, and it's really not, because you got to imagine if they could do this to one person, how many other cases and people are sitting innocent, wrongfully
Correct.
convicted for something that they didn't do, and then you have
Correct.
a person like that escape uh, or evade
Yes.
prosecution
Scrutiny.
in these
Yes.
cases because
Yes.
of their actions or prosecutorial misconduct and misdeeds and stuff. They evade it by resignation, and I don't think that's right. I just don't.
No, it's not. It's not right. Basically, you alleviate your responsibilities, not forgetting, of course, that if there's any type of corruption, it has a very bad domino effect on everyone. J-Jax.
It comes down to the no accountability. And I think that, I think that our justice system, if it worked like it was supposed to work, these
Yes.
people would not escape. I mean, I think back, I'm one of the older ones of the group here. I think back to, when I was younger, a lot of the stuff that we see happening in the last 20 years, it wasn't tolerated. If it was tolerated, it was so well hidden, we never heard about it. It wasn't made public.
Yes. Yes.
So, to see these, blatant statutes just completely ignored with no accountability. And
Yes.
it's like these people know that they're not going to be held accountable, so they just don't care.
Yes, correct. Thanks, J-Jax. And also these attorneys and judges, they take risks, right? And they know they sort of take a gamble approach. They high risk. Sometimes you need to question their moral ethics, the way they approach a particular case, etc., etc. And if they don't have the ramifications, then at the end of the day, the way I see it, it's lawyers looking after lawyers, right? And we've seen lots of examples of this with Ken Kratz, with the sexting scandal, how he tried to trivialize it, he tried to hide it, he tried to bargain with his fellow lawyers and attorneys, etc., to basically put it under the rug and give him protection, right? But of course, that didn't turn out too well for Ken Kratz, as we'll see. But if you don't have accountability, then attorneys, prosecuting teams can cause all sorts of damage. And you can see here that it's lawyer versus lawyer, right? You've got thousands and thousands of laws. You've got all these loopholes. It's basically preventing, we can see here, it's preventing Kathleen Zellner to even present her case, right? Let's think about it. If your case against Stephen and Brendan is bulletproof, then you should have no problems at all with further scrutiny. If what you presented in court is solid, 100%, you've got no problems here at all. So why keep on this facade? Why keep on stalling Kathleen Zellner? Kathleen Zellner is no lightweight in this game. She's a heavyweight. Exactly the same with Drizzen and Nyrider. So, you've got two big heavyweights now who've taken up the task to represent Brendan. Okay, guys. So if we can go on to slide 198, we don't really need to spend too much time here. But unfortunately, the same judge, Jerome Fox, he presided over those 2010 hearings, right? And you can see a picture here of Brendan. He's actually got a smile on his face. I think he looks confident, feels confident. But what was to happen next, I think would have shocked everyone, because now Brendan and his family can actually hear what took place between his own attorney and also not forgetting the investigator, Michael O'Kelly. All right. Now, guys, if we can go to slide 199. And this is looking at the 2010 post-conviction hearings. And I like to just echo what Jay Jack said. If you've got time, please have a listen to them, read them. They're very, very important. It gives you a background of what actually took place in the trials. And here we have Len Kaczynski being questioned, and his answers were pretty embarrassing. I haven't gone through his testimony just yet. I'm in the process of doing so. But what's remarkable, again, the family of Teresa Halbach was present. No expressions, no emotions. It's exactly how they've behaved throughout all the other trials. Guys, do we have any comments so far? Jay Jacks.
I've got a lot of comments about Kaczynski and O'Kelly, but I'll keep it brief.
Yes.
Anyone that, you can go through there are documents available that people can go through and look at Kaczynski's activities for the first month. And I did a post about this. I'm pulling from memory. I'm not looking at it, but in the first 20 days, I think it was, he gave 18 interviews, some kind of media interview in the first 20 days that he had Brendan's case. He goes and then he does a few days work. And then over the course of the next 2 weeks, he gives an average of 1 media interview per day, sometimes 2. Then he hires this O'Kelly, I'll be nice. And what a lot of people don't know is that Kaczynski already had an investigator, and this drummed up stuff that he says that he hired O'Kelly for to do this polygraph for cheap because he couldn't find one.
Correct.
Yeah, that's a lie. It's a complete lie. And I don't know where he got O'Kelly's name from, but I'm sure that he knew who he was and what he was.
Yes.
So anyway, the early portions of Kaczynski, what he actually did in Brendan's case is atrocious. I don't care what he says.
Yes, it is. It is. And I think he actually, in the end, even admitted what he did was not very, very good at all.
He did. He did.
And, what I found very embarrassing, if we have a look at MAM 1, was that he overtly admitted to doing all these things. And, they had emails. They had testimony. He had nowhere to go. He was entrapped.
What a lot of people also don't, I guess they may now, but, with Kaczynski's actions and when he, this whole setup, the May 12th, May 13th, that was a complete setup on Brendan, all of it.
Yes.
But a lot of people fail to really realize, or at least I did it in the beginning because I didn't understand it, is that when Kaczynski allowed the cops to re-interview Brendan on May 13th, and then it didn't really get resolved for another 3 months. That happened in May, June, July, August, before it really ever got in front of Fox, and Kaczynski got removed. That's 3 months of time that was wasted. And Brendan, there's no way Brendan can get that back.
Correct. In actual fact, Jay Jacks, we'll be discussing that in a second. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
I have a couple of comments. First, Jay Jacks, a tough act to follow with that strong impeachment of Kaczynski. But to amplify what he said, it's clear from MAM that Kaczynski was angling to become a judge, and he was looking for that exposure so he'd get name recognition to help his election campaign as a judge, which he did not win that next judicial election that he was angling to. Thank goodness. Again, with regard to our last conversation about being held accountable. He was in no way held accountable for anything that he did. I mean, what he did was prosecutorial, misconduct.
Yes.
Fitting of his job. I mean, what he did was not legal to Brendan. I mean, you cannot go treating your client like that. Face no repercussions for it at all. Which is just unbelievable, as he faced no repercussions for violation of his recent restraining order. What is
correct?
And the last thing I wanted to point out was we know how much Mike O'Kelly was paid. He was paid $15,000 for that treatment of
correct.
Okay, can you believe that?
Correct.
That's unbelievable. Correct.
And Len Kaczynski, he hired Michael O'Kelly initially to do a polygraph test. I think the polygraph test was about $350 in terms of like charge. That was his role. But then Michael O'Kelly's role morphed into becoming like an investigator for Len Kaczynski, and we'll talk about that in a second. But really, I believe that, correct me if I'm wrong, but Len Kaczynski actually did a TV interview before meeting his client. And in that interview, he referred to Stephen Avery as evil incarnate. And you're thinking, wait a minute, you haven't even talked to your client yet. And you've already basically said, well, Stephen Avery's guilty. My client obviously must be guilty as well. And that's the approach that he took, which is rather remarkable for an attorney meant to be working for his client, not against his client. And that had devastating effect, as we'll discuss in a minute. Bibi, did you have a comment?
Yeah, you must have heard me thinking. Just that he is also another one that is now disgraced for his treatment of women under him.
Correct. Correct. And would you, Bibi, you want to make any comments about what he does with cats?
I was really trying not to, but Len Meow Kaczynski. Yeah. Meow. Meow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it true, Big Jeff, that he likes stroking cats and making cat calls to certain females in his department?
I thought we were trying to keep this PG, Dr. Silver. Did you say stroking?
Stroking, yes, stroking, which is rather bizarre. So, here's another example of a disgraced attorney, both Len and, of course, Ken Kratz. I don't know what it is, but it's pretty bizarre behavior. Okay, Big Jeff.
You brought up Ken Kratz, and it instantly made me think, and maybe J. Jack can corroborate this for us. Didn't Ken Kratz fight tooth and nail against Brendan getting a new attorney?
J. Jack.
I don't. He may have. I don't remember that specifically in the 2006 motions and stuff. But that is a possibility. I don't remember.
Anybody who says Ken Kratz was just doing his job, take a look at what he did to, he certainly didn't want Dean Strang to take over for Stephen. He fought that. My recollection is that he objected minimally to this obviously vile and illegal treatment that was given to Brendan.
Yes.
Well, another aspect of that, to throw this in, is that when all this came up on May 12th, 2006, this was all driven down the road by O'Kelly. To have this interview, to let the cops interview Brendan on Saturday, the following day.
Yes.
Kratz had to approve that. So why wasn't he removed? Because he knew that Brendan had a lawyer. I don't get it.
Yes. Yeah. We'll J-Jax, we'll actually be discussing this very, very soon because it's eye-opening, the strategy that took place. Obi-Wan, thank you, J-Jax. Obi-Wan, do you have a comment?
Yeah, there was a redditor that said it best. He says this is a judicial gangbang where you have you have an impartial judge. You got corrupt, crooked prosecutors and a corrupt attorney doing mischievous deeds here. And how could you not, under all the circumstances that we've been dealt in this case, how could you not declare a mistrial on this after O'Kelly and Kaczynski?
Yeah. Well, this is where I thank you, Obi-Wan. You're correct. And this really must have blown the minds of Drizzen and Nyrider, because it was so overt. It was so obvious what took place. There was a paper trail. There were emails. There were correspondence. It was black and white. And yet, we know the outcome. There was no retrial, right? The judge dismissed it. But we're just getting ahead of ourselves here. Now, guys, get ready. Get ready to get a big paper bag and a bucket, because we're going to be talking about Michael O'Kelly. So, guys, let's have a look at slide 200. Now, of course, Len Kaczynski hired Michael O'Kelly, and Michael O'Kelly did a polygraph on Brendan Dassey. And so Michael O'Kelly had, I believe it was 30 questions altogether, 3 sets of 10. And the way Michael O'Kelly graded the polygraph was that it came back as inconclusive, right? So you couldn't tell whether Brendan Dassey was telling the truth or lying. It was inconclusive. J-Jax.
Just one brief comment from that O'Kelly posted, Brendan. Are you sorry you did it? Or are you not sorry you did it? Son of a bitch.
Correct. So correct. Thank you, J-Jax. So the way he conducted the pre-interview, the way he conducted the polygraph was all wrong, right? It was basically designed to entrap Brendan, right? Not to get to the truth, but to get to a confession. So all the questions were skewed to basically entrap their own client, Brendan, into confessing, right? So if you look at the nature of the survey that Brendan did, and we covered this in the podcast, it wasn't really designed to get to find out what really transpired. It was basically to get him to confess so they can get it down on paper, right? And as you can see the comment here underneath Michael O'Kelly's picture, he was only interested in getting Brendan to plead guilty, right? Just get out of your minds that he was trying to get to the truth. He was trying to get Brendan to plead guilty. And his approach is just mind-numbing. And again, that's why I urge you guys to have a look, read the 2010 post-conviction, because the way he approached this interview with Brendan was phenomenal. And you can see on the right-hand side what he did. He got pictures of Teresa Halbach, her church, all the things that she liked. He put down pictures of the Avery Salvage Yard. I think the poster that said "Dead End." All these things to evoke emotions in Brendan. And correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but he actually used a wooden spoon that he put in front of Brendan, because apparently his mum used to hit him with a wooden spoon when he was a little kid. He used that as an emotional tool. J-Jax.
He did. And Kaczynski wants to say that he didn't know what O'Kelly was going to do. He's a damn liar.
Correct.
Read the hearings in 2010. Find out.
Correct. And that's why MAM 1 and MAM 2 are good, but jeepers, they could have gone even further with those post-conviction hearings, because apparently the producers and directors must have filmed it, because we've got this footage here. That footage there is priceless, right? And don't forget, Ken Kratz was put on the stand as well, and he was questioned about what took place. So as you can see here, Michael O'Kelly put all this paraphernalia in front of Brendan, designed to make him feel guilty, to make him feel ashamed and remorseful for killing Teresa Halbach. Now, when he was first interviewed by Michael O'Kelly, Brendan wrote down a very simple story, right? Michael O'Kelly asked him, look, what happened that day? This Halloween, October 31st, 2005. And we've covered this in the podcast. Very important. And what Brendan said was, he got off the bus with his brother Blaine. They walked down the gravel drive, and they both went inside their home, Barb's trailer. Blaine was on the phone, did certain things, and Brendan was playing computer games. Later on that evening, Stephen called him. Hey, look, come over, come and help me. I've got a few items I want to burn, blah, blah, blah. That's it. Boring, straight down the track, nothing nefarious. Well, Michael O'Kelly said to Brendan, well, who's missing here? Brendan said, what do you mean? Well, Teresa Halbach's missing here. You're not telling me the truth. So Michael O'Kelly kept on emphasizing to Brendan, I can't help you unless you tell me the truth. So even though his own client said, look, hey, I just got off the bus. I went home. I saw nothing. I heard nothing. For Michael O'Kelly, that was not good enough. So he made Brendan rewrite the story again and again until he started even drew Teresa Halbach on the bed with the ropes, with the chains. So he had to change what he initially wrote because Michael O'Kelly he's not happy with the outcome. So really, the bizarre, Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all.
One thing that we learned in the phone calls, and I know we don't have Brendan's phone calls yet. They've been FOIA'd, from what I understand, and they're going to be heartbreaking to listen to. But we do hear Stephen talking to Barb at one point, and Barb does indicate that Brendan is going absolutely crazy in jail. And at this point, he would have only been in jail, from say May, from March 3rd till May. It's about a month. But we really don't know what Brendan's mental state was in jail. I really suspect that he wasn't very calm, cool, and collected. I mean, he would have said, again, he would have said anything. I can't help you. Well, somebody's going to give me help. I need to say this. I'm going to get help. It's just a sad story,
It is a very sad story indeed. But let me tell you what these guys did, right? And this is just from reading Ken Kratz's deposition for the 2010 post convictions. So basically, here's the strategy. Len Kaczynski and Michael O'Kelly, their aim was to get Brendan Dassey to plead guilty because O'Kelly and Kaczynski, and clearly with Ken Kratz, their whole bargaining was to get a plea deal to get done. So that's the strategy they went with. And Ken Kratz knew that this was going to happen, that Kaczynski and O'Kelly were going to try and get their own client to plead guilty, right? So they're not even assuming that Brendan Dassey was innocent. They're assuming that Stephen Avery forced Brendan Dassey to commit these horrendous crimes. So their whole strategy was Stephen Avery, evil. He had coerced or forced his own nephew to commit these crimes. We're going to get Brendan Dassey to testify against his own uncle. We're going to get Brendan Dassey to admit that he had committed all these horrendous crimes. And Ken Kratz was going to do a plea deal, right? He's going to do a plea deal with Kaczynski to say, look, if Brendan Dassey cooperates with us, and hence he looks good, he looks good in the light, we're going to go for a plea deal. We're going to go for a plea deal of 15 years in prison. And if you read Ken Kratz's book, he even says, hey, what are you complaining about? Rape, murder, 15 years, what's your problem? Which is just unbelievable. So even if this poor kid, 16 at the time, had committed no crime, it would have been better for him to admit that he had raped and killed Teresa Halbach than to say, hey, I'm innocent, because by pleading innocent, he's now going to stay in prison at least to 2048. But if he had pleaded guilty, he would have been out in 15 years, right? So you can imagine committing, saying that you committed a crime that you never did, but you're out free on the streets. So could you imagine the impact that would have had on Stephen, who's saying, hey, I never committed any crime. My nephew didn't commit any crime. So believe it or not, Ken Kratz and Kaczynski with O'Kelly were in cahoots, right? And Drizzen was asking all these really good questions to Ken Kratz, who openly admitted, yep, that's what we were doing. So this is the plan. The plan was to get the interview done on May the 13th with Fassbender and Wiegert with Brendan Dassey, without Kaczynski being present. And that's why he got sacked, because the lawyer, the attorney wasn't present, but O'Kelly was, right? He was looking through a two-way mirror, right? And the only thing O'Kelly had to do was to give Brendan Dassey a phone if he requested his lawyer. Christy, do you have a comment?
Do you really think Len Kaczynski's presence would have made a difference?
No, not at all. But when you think about it, being his attorney, he had to be there to represent his client. J-Jax, do you have any comments?
Yeah, thinking about that interview on May 12th it was set up by O'Kelly and Kaczynski at least a week prior to that meeting. If Kaczynski had been, if you remember, O'Kelly said the words something to the effect of, it's better if you're not there.
Yes.
So I can bond with Brendan Bullcrap.
Correct.
I mean, it's like,
correct.
That's like oil and water bonding. Anyway, if you think about Kaczynski being present when the O'Kelly, all that took place, as Brendan's lawyer, Kaczynski would have had to put a stop to a lot of it legally.
Correct.
If he had been present. Same thing with the interview between when he, this whole thing came up on Saturday with Fassbender and Wiegert. He would have had to put a stop or said, no, you can't ask that question. Move on. Correct. Legally. So by him not being there, this creates this pocket for the cops to get this free pass on him. It's just terrible.
Correct. And thank you, J-Jax. What is remarkable is this, and this I fell on the ground. O'Kelly spoke with Fassbender and Wiegert. And he said, my client, which is Brendan, he doesn't like you, Fassbender, but he really likes Wiegert, right? He thinks that Wiegert is God, right? So he gave a heads up to the investigators for the state on how to question Brendan. That is, Fassbender was to take a back seat, right, out of camera view, and Wiegert was meant to question him up close and personal, and that's what Wiegert did. If you look at the video, it's Wiegert that's talking to Brendan, and this all came from O'Kelly, who's meant to be representing Brendan. So O'Kelly gave the investigators a heads up to say, Fassbender, you hold back. Wiegert, you question my client because he likes you. Obi-Wan.
Yeah, it was like he was trying to coerce him into doing that like good cop, bad cop routine.
Correct. Because Brendan didn't feel very comfortable with Fassbender in the way he questioned him, but Brendan felt more at ease, if I can use that term, with Wiegert questioning him, which is remarkable that you're going to provide that type of information to the state investigators, which is really, really crazy. So you can see here, O'Kelly put all this paraphernalia in front of Brendan. And eventually Brendan broke down and complied with what O'Kelly wanted. So he wrote down what he allegedly did with his uncle to Teresa Halbach and wrote everything down. And of course, what does O'Kelly do? He rings up Kaczynski, he rings up Fassbender. And so what they do is they organize another interrogation session for May the 13th, Saturday, May the 13th. Now, wait. If you thought this blew your mind, this is going to really blow your mind. Ken Kratz admitted when he was being questioned by Drizin, why did you get this set up? Well, we wanted another interview done by Brendan on May the 13th. And here's the reason why. He didn't want the jury to sit through over 4 hours of testimony, the interrogation session that they did on the 1st of March. So what they wanted was for Brendan to do a summary. Now, wait for it, a summary, a nice, neat confession, as in, 2 or 3 minutes. Yes, Uncle Stephen and I did A, B, C, D. We did this to Teresa, and this is the reason why we did it. Thank you very much. So can you believe that Ken Kratz wanted a nice, neat confession done on May the 13th so he can use that in trial? Because he was at odds. He even admitted, he goes, I didn't know whether to go through the route of detailed court using forensic evidence or to go through the route of using Brendan Dassey's confession. So, in other words, he wanted Brendan to do a nice, neat summary of what they did. So Ken Kratz could present that in court and to use Brendan Dassey as a witness, as a star witness against his own uncle. That means that the court case will be over in about 1 or 2 days. No problems at all nice and neat, except one problem, right? When Brendan talked to the investigators on May the 13th, he now started changing his story. He didn't talk. He started recanting. It was a huge mess. And furthermore, Len Kaczynski got sacked. So it all backfired on Ken Kratz. Now, how on earth can Ken Kratz, who's the state prosecutor, use the defense to get information to the state in order to prosecute both Brendan and Stephen Avery? I'm sorry, guys, but I have never, ever heard of that. Guys, do we have any comments? Big Jeff.
It blows the mind. It is
You-
unbelievable. I just don't have a word for it. I do. I'm sorry.
Big Jeff, I didn't believe it until I read it. And that's why I kept on posting these pages from the interrogation session on Foul Play, thinking, am I dreaming this? Am I hearing? And mind you, Big Jeff, Ken Kratz had no issues at all. Ethically, morally, no problems at all. He even admitted that when he was being questioned by Drizzen. So he had no problems. And because they had a paper trail, Ken Kratz could not get out of it. So in other words, he was being CC'd in the emails of what was going on between Kaczynski, O'Kelly, and Brendan Dassey. Bibi, do you have a comment?
If you read these last few slides like a book, nobody would believe it.
No, you cannot believe it. So a lot of the hard work was being done by Kaczynski and O'Kelly, who were passing on the information to Ken Kratz. And Ken Kratz was going to use that information against Brendan and against Stephen, but with a plea deal. So if Brendan behaved, Brendan could be out in 15 years. J-Jax.
O'Kelly was also in contact verbally, or I guess by phone, and also he copied Fassbender and probably Uyghur, I don't remember, on a lot of his activities and to what he was doing.
Correct.
And if you read further, I don't want to say this wrong, but I almost want to say that it was Kaczynski that suggested a search warrant on some.
Yes.
You remember that?
Yes, I do. In fact, they're the ones that told the state to subpoena the van and another vehicle for evidence.
Yes. But don't use my name. I'm not involved.
That's right. That's correct. So, in other words, when they were talking to Brendan, right? Brendan had mentioned a knife, because remember, Brendan said we had stabbed Teresa Halbach, we had slit her throat, we had stabbed her in the stomach, we had cut off her hair. So, Kaczynski and O'Kelly were telling the state, you better subpoena the van and I think another vehicle on the salvage yard and check it for weapons, right? So they were passing on information to the state. To me, that's truly remarkable. And of course, right, here's the problem. Every time Brendan had mentioned all this information about a rifle, a gun, a knife, and where they'd hid them, the hair. Of course, the investigators came back in and they searched all these places. They tested all the knives. Nothing came up. So all the things that Brendan was telling them, what was frustrating was that the investigators could not corroborate what Brendan was telling them. So they had a big gap in the knowledge. But what is despicable was Ken Kratz was going to use Brendan to fill in the gaps. So to give him the narrative of what took place. Because if you remove Brendan Dassey, Ken Kratz knew that at best, the case against Stephen was purely circumstantial. And that's what terrified Ken Kratz. Panel, do we have any comments? Big Jeff.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit on an upcoming TTT that you're going to hear about, but it bears mention here. Ken Kratz uses the term when he describes item FL, of course, which is directly found after Brendan's confession in his most excellent tome, Game Changer. He says the item
Game
FL was
changer.
the game changer. So I have a question for those people who are fond of sports analogy. If you have a game that's going well, that you're winning, would you describe when do you need to invoke the term game changer?
Game
Isn't it
changer.
isn't it if the game is going a little poorly, you need a game changer to turn around and win it?
There's no question about that.
So
Yeah,
when he says
thank
game
you.
changer, why
Yeah.
is he saying that? Right.
I
All
thi-
from Brendan's confession.
Correct. I think it's pretty obvious. They knew that they had a tough case to sell, right? If you take out Brendan's confession, coerced confession, the state really, they were in big trouble, right? Because if you come up with a planting scenario, you can't disprove a planting scenario, right? If you've got no Brendan's confession, therefore you don't have an insider's viewpoint of what allegedly took place. Yes, you've got the victim's vehicle that's got 2 sets of blood in there, right? But Stephen Avery could have easily come up with a reason why his blood was in there. He never did, right? So therefore, the case against Stephen was circumstantial because no one actually saw Stephen Avery physically assault. In fact, no one saw the two of them together. Hence, why Brendan Dassey was so important, because he filled in the blanks. So that's why Ken Kratz was clever to use Brendan Dassey, but then he realized that it backfired. So in his book, and Christy will back me up, he goes, we never used any of Brendan Dassey's statements against Stephen Avery. Stephen Avery did himself in by the forensic evidence. Christy, do you have any comments?
I couldn't get unmuted. Of course they didn't use Brendan. It wouldn't come off. It's like Ken Kratz was controlling my mute button.
Oh, no.
No kidding, you didn't use Brendan Dassey's confession. He knew Brendan Dassey's confession was garbage. He knew it wasn't true. There's no way anybody could think that confession was real.
Correct.
He knew that if he brought that confession in there, it would have been all over.
Correct. Because if he had used if he had used Brendan in Stephen's trial, Brendan would have simply said, it wasn't true. I recant everything. So that was going to look really, really bad for the state. So hence, Ken Kratz was smart enough not to call up Brendan. Christy.
And I was pulling something up while Jeff was speaking. I just want to bring light to Jeff talking about the game changer and read the whole statement. This was the forensic discovery I had hoped for. Physical evidence tying Stephen Avery to Teresa's murder. This bullet was the game changer. It would make my case.
Correct.
That's the exact quote.
Correct. So here we've got this incredible situation whereby, hey, look, Brendan, he's too unstable to use his confession. But as Dvorak said, he goes, but they used the fruits of that confession to get to item FL and use item FL as the game changer to lynch Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey. So on the one hand, Ken Kratz didn't want to use Brendan Dassey because Brendan Dassey was like a poison chalice. However, they used elements of his coerced confession to, oh my God, we found the bullet, item FL, and guess what? It just happened to have Teresa Halbach's DNA on it. So in one effect, in one notion, yes, it was the game changer, but we all know what happened with item FL. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
Yeah, let's also not forget the hood latch swab, because that was
correct.
Also discovered as the fruit of the confession. It bore multiple fruits.
Correct. So, Brendan's coming up with all these things. And they're being suggested not by Brendan. They're being suggested by Fassbender and Uyghur. And it's Fassbender that kept on telling Brendan, well, what did he do under the hood? What did he do under the hood? Because they knew that when they examined under the hood, that the battery terminals were unlatched. One of the battery terminals was unlatched. So they were trying to put seed in Brendan's mind. Well, did Stephen go under the hood? And eventually he said, yeah, he was under the hood. I don't know what he did there. And in actual fact, Brendan said that he had scratched his finger while he was under the hood. Of course, that made things worse because no one found any blood on the hood latch or anywhere under the hood. So you can see that Brendan was merely guessing. But Big Jeff, you make a good point. They didn't want to use Brendan, but they used the fruits of his confession with the hood latch DNA and also with item FL. And of course, the shenanigans that took place with that. J. Jax, do you have a comment?
Yeah, Fox should have never allowed that. That should have all been thrown out when he threw Kaczynski out in the road to get hit by a bus. That should have all been removed. And he didn't. He didn't correct that.
Correct. And by the way, thank you, Jax. By the way, if you read the interrogation sessions of 2010, you can clearly see the judge was getting really, really pissed off with Drizzen and the way he was questioning Kratz. He was basically telling him, oh, come on, hurry up. Are you sure you want to ask that? What type of question is that? And so he was trying to shut Drizzen up and to speed him up. But, Jax, you'll admit, Fallon was the one that was the bulldog.
Absolutely.
Anything that Drizzen said that could legally be blocked, Fallon jumped up immediately to come to the rescue of his colleague. You can't ask that. I object. And the judge, in almost all cases, said, yep, I agree.
Yeah, it was bad. I mean, it's so obvious. And, I understand judges, they watch the clock and all that. A lot of that was terrible. It was really bad.
Yes. But you have to admit, J. Jax, Ken Kratz being on the stand, that was priceless.
It was.
Because we got the whole mapping of what they were doing with Kaczynski, O'Kelly, and Brendan. We got it all mapped out, right? In black and white. You can see the strategy, and Ken Kratz had no problems with that whatsoever. And Ken Kratz even said, oh, well, yeah, it's highly unusual, but did he care? He didn't care at all.
No, he didn't. And there's no doubt that they colluded. A lot of it's not on paper, but it's the actions. We see the results of these actions that came about later. We can't say that it was coincidental. There's not a chance. No way. That was all planned.
No. Yes, you could tell. It's sort of like you scratch my back, I scratch your back. We both benefit from this. Your client will benefit because we'll only have to sit in prison for 15 years. We do a plea deal. Thank you very much. We could all go home. But the problem was it all fell to pieces. And that really upset, especially Ken Kratz, because then Ken Kratz was forced to go through the long route of forensics. And that's when all the shenanigans came out, because on close inspection of the forensics, we're talking about the bones, the bullet, the key, the blood, right? You can see the hood latch. You can see the shenanigans that was being played out, right? It didn't hold water, but Ken Kratz didn't want to go down that way. He wanted a nice, simple confession from Brendan Dassey in a nice little statement, presented to the judge and say, hey, look, judge, he's my star witness. He saw what his uncle did. He colluded with his uncle. Let's go with the judge. Let's get the sentencing underway. But Ken Kratz was forced to go through the route of the forensics. And of course, that now brings in Kathleen Zellner, who can now re-examine all the forensics and take it apart. Jay Jacks.
Yeah, you pretty much covered what I was going to say. He didn't want these details, all these pesky little details getting in his way. And he obviously he couldn't legally use anything from Brendan unless Brendan took that plea deal because the right of self-incrimination. So
Correct. So he admitted that he could not use Brendan at all unless a plea deal was done. And of course, that didn't take place. And in his book, and Christy will back me up, Ken Kratz actually blamed his grandfather, Alan, because, Alan in a phone call says, don't you go, Christy, take it away.
I was just going to back you up. I don't remember exactly what he says, but yes, he blames Alan. It's all Alan's fault. They called in Alan to have a stern talking to with the grandson and told him not to take the plea deal. And he says it was basically because Alan and Dolores were trying to protect Stephen, that they didn't really care about Brendan.
Correct. And he even said that they would sacrifice their own grandson to get their son out. And I'm there, what the hell? And he said the same comment to Barb, that Barb would rather protect her brother than her own son. So you got a prosecuting attorney writing a book saying those things against the family. Big Jeff.
I've heard you guys articulate that statement, and we've talked about it on the Discord server multiple times, and I still can't parse it in my brain. What the frig does it even mean that they would sacrifice? How? And in what way was Brendan sacrificed? In what way did it help Stephen get out? It helped Stephen get out. It doesn't make any sense. I can't even parse the words of that statement into what it even means.
Christy, do you have a comment? Thank you, Big Jeff. I know, Christy.
Because if Brendan took the plea deal, he was admitting his guilt, and that would solidify Stephen's conviction. So by them not allowing Brendan to take the plea, that's how he's making he makes me so angry.
Correct.
That's how he makes Brendan out to be the quote unquote, using his words, not mine, sacrificial lamb. Brendan was sacrificed to save Stephen. Had anybody in that, and I'm speaking from Ken Kratz's brain, not my own. Had anybody in that family truly loved Brendan and cared about Brendan, they would have encouraged him to take that plea deal and screw Stephen, because he's the monster that did this, and he's the reason Brendan is in the position he's in. That's Ken Kratz's method of thinking. That's exactly where he is when he's writing those words.
Correct. So
enter Millbilly.
Millbilly.
Well, you hear hundreds of times Stephen Avery asking Barb to get him a new attorney, asking Jody to tell Barb to get him a new attorney, asking Dolores to ask Barb to get him a new attorney, and she doesn't do it ever. Until it's too late.
Stephen was looking out for Brendan in those early days. Stephen was really looking out for Brendan. He knew what was going to happen. They did it to him. They're doing it to him for a second time. He knew what they were going to do. At this point, Stephen has figured out that they want him bad enough. They're going to do anything. And that now means they've gone after this poor 16-year-old kid.
He doesn't actually just say, get Brendan an attorney. He says, get your boys an attorney.
Yes, all of them. Yes.
Yes.
He says it numerous times, and nobody listens.
Correct. In fact, Barb was the one that asked Stephen for $100,000, I think, to get a new attorney, right? And so Brendan, of course, went with the public defender, but then had to change that public defender because the public defender happened to be a distant relation to Teresa Horbach. So he had to recuse himself. And that's when, unfortunately, later on, Len Kaczynski came on the scene. So it was all a bit of a disaster, unfortunately. But it goes to show that if you start off on the wrong foot legally, you get yourself into a lot of trouble. But yes, Ken Kratz was basically blaming the Avery and Dassey families because they should have convinced Brendan to admit to having committed these crimes, and hence he'll be out in 15 years' time. But because he didn't go for the plea deal, he now sits in there to 2048, and Stephen is in there for life in prison. So it's bizarre. You have to admit to a crime you haven't committed in order to be released early. Sammy.
Yeah, Crockett Thompson is asking, ask doctor about Brendan's phone call the 13th of May to his mom, fruit of poisonous tree.
Correct. I mean, we haven't even entered that part. Yes, the whole idea was to get Brendan to give a phone call to his mother. Now, this was unbelievable, and Ken Kratz was aware of this. What they wanted to do was to get Brendan to have like a confession to his mother. And as a consequence of that phone call on May the 13th, no, it was the 14th, the day after, they used those words against Brendan because they played that phone call in the court, and they actually used that as a confession because Brendan said, you know, I did some of it. So Fallon made a real big deal about those words, so they entrapped Brendan because it was Uyghur that said, well, you're going to call your mum? When you're going to call your mum? Yeah, it'll be the day after. And so, of course, they knew that the jail phone calls were being recorded. What did they do? They used his own words against him. Now, if Kaczynski or his attorney was present, Kaczynski or an attorney would have said, be careful what you say. So he had no legal representation. And of course, this fell into the lap of Ken Kratz. What did they do? They used it against him in court. So, yeah, thank you, Crockett, but that's as bad as it got. All right, guys, do we have any other comments before we move on to slide 201? All right. So, guys, if we have a look at slide 201, now this is Dvorak, and oh boy, did he ask some great questions. So I haven't read the 2010 trial documents of O'Kelly yet. I need to see a therapist first before I read that one, but that's definitely worth reading because part of it was being shown on MAM 1. And you could see that O'Kelly had no problems, no issues, no ethics doing what he did to his own client. And I quote, this is Dvorak. So your goal is not only to get Brendan to confess, but to also go out and gather evidence to help the state in its prosecution, correct? And of course, O'Kelly says, yes. Even if that evidence tends to inculpate Brendan. And then Michael O'Kelly had to admit on the stand, Brendan is my client, yes. And Drizzen goes, they were working for the prosecution. And guys, you can see in black and white, they got caught out. O'Kelly and Kaczynski were indeed working for the state. J. Jacks.
You nailed it because when if you read through what the questions that were asked of Dvorak asked, it's clear as glass.
Yes. Oh, but what I still can't understand is with all this overt behavior between prosecution and state, why didn't the judge order a new trial?
That's
Can
it.
anyone can anyone offer any suggestions?
Well, I don't know for sure, but I don't. I mean, personally, I don't see how Fox could have known all these shenanigans that were pulled really right under his nose in 2006,
Yes.
2007. So if he would have, made the correction that he should have made, at least during 2010, he would have been kind of admitting, saying, yeah, these guys kind of screwed over me. And now, they're caught. I don't know if he thought it would look bad for him. I'm not really sure, but he should have corrected the issue right here.
Correct. But how bad would it have been for both Drizzen and Nyrider, who are professionals in this game, to hear the judge not give a new trial? They must be thinking, what the hell? You've got the evidence of collusion right in front of you. And yet the judge didn't demand a new trial. Big Jeff.
It just seems to me that Judge Fox had a conflict of interest because, with all these shenanigans going on right under his unknowing nose, to admit that a new trial was required would have admitted his incompetence in the first trial.
I think yes.
And that admission of incompetence would, is something that he was unwilling to do, and I think that's why he didn't do it.
Yes.
Who signs all the search warrants?
Oh, Judge Fox.
Exactly. He was there from day one.
Right, of course. Yes. To me, I think Judge Fox passed handballed it to somebody else. It was too hot for him. The potato was too hot. He decided to pass it on to somebody else. He didn't want to get involved because as a judge, you really should be aware of all these things, all these wheelings and dealings that are going on. He clearly had no idea. Yet he didn't have the gumption to say, no, we need a new trial. Excuse me. Okay, guys. Are there any comments so far? All right. So, guys, let's move on. I think to possibly the most shameful part I've ever seen, and that's on slide 202. Now, to me, this was mind-blowing because now remember, O'Kelly is meant to be working for Brendan. Michael O'Kelly, during the interrogation session with Brendan, he wanted to hand Brendan a blue ribbon because it represented Teresa Halbach and, how do you feel about this? He wanted to give a blue ribbon to Brendan because he wanted Brendan to say he was sorry, right? Now, if you haven't committed the crime, how can you say you're sorry for a crime you haven't committed? And this was bizarre because as O'Kelly was being questioned, O'Kelly was crying all because of the blue ribbon. So the bizarre thing was the blue ribbon was making O'Kelly cry, but it had no effect on Brendan. Guys, does anyone want to make a comment on O'Kelly and the blue ribbon incident? Big Jeff.
What a complete, total, and utter farce. That crying job wouldn't even have passed a poor director on daytime television.
No, but it happened. It happened. Christy, do you have a comment?
Those who know me know that I'm not left speechless very often. This is one of those times I'm kind of left speechless. I can't believe it was allowed. I can't believe he did it. Those were the biggest crocodile tears I've ever seen.
Correct. Because, thank you, Christy. To me, O'Kelly got caught red-handed, right? He knew he was in big, big trouble. So what does he do? He turns on the emotions. And the bizarre thing was, the blue ribbon was meant to elicit a response from Brendan, but it never did. So it backfired. Sammy, do you have a comment?
Well, earlier we had a comment from, I'm trying to find it again, Ronald. He said it seems to be a conflict of interest for the same judge to decide appeals.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, in effect, and Big Jeff alluded to this, if Judge Fox had said, yep, we demand a new trial, and I think the spotlight would have been put on Judge Fox as if to say, hey, you're in the courtroom. These guys were in front of you. How come you never picked this up? How come you never picked that up? So it would have looked really bad for Judge Fox. But if you have a, thank you, Sammy, for that question. But if you have a look at that picture, look at Michael Hallbach. He must be thinking, what the hell? If you notice, the whole trial had nothing to do with the murder of his sister. It had all to do with the actions of the people representing Brendan, right? Kaczynski and O'Kelly. The Hallbach family must be thinking, what the hell just happened, right? Because it wasn't delving into the murder per se. It was about the way O'Kelly and Kaczynski behaved, right? Now, anyone sitting in that courtroom would have tweaked, there's going to be a new trial here. Sammy, do you have a comment?
Jen said, joining late, sorry, if someone had asked already, but is there somewhere Brendan's trial is recorded on transcript publicly?
You mean the 2010 or the original? We're talking about the original.
I want to say probably. I would think so.
The original trial? Well, the directors, they would have videotaped the whole lot. We only saw only a part in Man 1. Jay Jacks, do you have a comment?
Yeah, as far as I know, the neither trial are they're obviously recorded by somebody's got them. Surely on the filmmakers and possibly even the county. I don't know that though, but certainly the filmmakers have the footage.
Well,
correct.
The whole trials were live streamed on the news station's web channels.
So they probably have an archive too.
Oh, they definitely do.
So,
yes, correct.
But as far as being posted online, as far as I know, they are nowhere because it's been looked for.
I've not seen them. I've not seen them.
Just just the written transcript.
Correct. The written transcripts you can download and read. But yeah, they have been recorded, and the two directors from MAM, they had to have special permission to film. So they were given permission to film the trials. But yeah, I would say that they have been filmed, recorded for sure. All right then. So we've gone through so far the behaviour of both Ken Kratz, Kaczynski, and Michael O'Kelly. And it's pretty obvious that Kaczynski and O'Kelly were working for the state. They wanted Brendan to confess, so to make the job of Ken Kratz easier, so he didn't have to go through the long, arduous route of forensic evidence, but to use a star witness like Brendan Dassey to basically provide a narrative of what Uncle Steve and him did, and both Brendan did. It would have been all wrapped up real super quick. Brendan, because he appeared to be a good guy, would have got in a plea deal 15 years. Brendan would have been released in 15 years. Stephen Avery would have been put in prison until he died. Civil lawsuit gone. Ken Kratz is a white knight. He's all set for life, except it all came crashing down. Guys, do we have any comments? Okay. All right. So I know it's hard to believe, but it's all there in black and white. and it indeed happened. So, guys, if we have a look at slide 203, now, this is unbelievable, of course, because remember, Brendan's mum, she was there in the trials, and believe it or not, they came up with an agreement that Barb was not to be present in the courtroom when Fassbender and Wiegert were there. So they prevented Barb from being in the courtroom when Fassbender and Wiegert gave their responses. Now, of course, what happened is that everyone heard the jail phone call between Brendan and his mum, right? And you could see that Barb was very upset with Brendan. You know, why didn't you tell me earlier? We could have left, we could, etc. And of course, the jury hearing that was very bad, right? And so that counted against Brendan, and I think it went a long way to convince the judge, nah, sorry, we're not doing a new trial here. And I quote, on January the 25th, 2010, just 3 days after Brendan's hearing ends, Judge Willis denies Stephen's motion for a new trial. That's Stephen Avery. And if we have, okay. Well, guys, do we have any J-Jax, do you have any comments?
Yeah, that phone call, May 13th phone call, what the jury didn't hear was what Wiegert said to Brendan. He basically hemmed him up in the corner, said, hey, are you going to call your mom? Yeah, I'm going to call her tomorrow. Don't you think you should call her or not? Well, he basically browbeat him into calling his mother and saying whatever.
Correct. Look, it was a perfect setup from the get-go.
It was.
They knew what they were doing. They entrapped Brendan. They used Brendan's words against him in court, and they got him convicted on 3 charges. And it's mind-blowing because Ken Kratz knew how unreliable Brendan was. So on the one hand, Brendan is a poison chalice, but on the other hand, they can use certain words to go against Brendan, which is remarkable. Big Jeff, do you have any comment?
Yeah, I said this last week, but to me, it's very important to harp on. When Brendan makes that phone call to his mom, it's what he doesn't say. That's incredibly important. He knows he's got to give because he's been browbeat into it, and he's going crazy because he's in jail. He's got to give his mom some type of confession. And what does he admit to doing? Well, some of it. He didn't say, well, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't stop him. I helped him throw the body in the fire without. He doesn't say anything. He does not admit to anything. He just says some of it because he didn't do anything.
No, correct. And I think the sum of it simply means he went over to Uncle Steve and they threw some furniture and other bits and pieces on the fire. I don't think when he said some of it, did that mean assaulting, killing, raping, mutilating, and burning the victim, Teresa Hallberg? But it did sound pretty bad. Of course, as soon as Brendan said some of it, that immediately triggered Barb, right? And what did Barb say on national television? Steve, I hate you. I hope you rot in hell, in jail or whatever. Now, that's not too good, is it? When your own sister says those things on national television, it's not going to look good, right? So, unfortunately, that's how it panned out. So, the state were very clever through Fassbender and Wiegert to entrap Brendan and then get his own words that he said to his own mother to be used against him in his trial. Yeah, very despicable. Well, look, guys, I am conscious of the time. I think we have covered quite a lot because I think the next slide is really looking at Ken Kratz and his shenanigans involving his sexting. I don't think we can really cover that in 5 minutes. I'm sure a lot of people will want to make. Christy, do you have any comments?
I'm going to need at least a few hours. So either end
Right.
it now or let's keep going.
Right. I'm pretty happy to close our podcast off now. I think we have covered quite a lot. We've looked at the 2010 post-conviction trials. We've looked at the questioning of Ken Kratz, Kaczynski, O'Kelly. Of course, that's perfect to do a TTT on, where we can look at that further, investigate that further, because there's a lot more information to come out. And I'm only beginning to reading those trial documents now, and they are eye-opening. I think this is a good natural break for the podcast, because next week we can almost wrap it up, and it really brings together Ken Kratz and what he's all about, and through his sexting scandal. And I think we need to devote at least a good hour on that, because that brings in together quite nicely his book, and the way he wrote certain comments in his book. It all brings it home in one piece. So, guys, are you quite happy that we conclude the podcast for today? Guys, are we all happy?
Sure.
Yep.
Beautiful. All right, guys. Sammy, before we close the podcast, are there any outstanding questions from our listeners?
Not that I can see. Everybody basically having a good discussion of everything.
Excellent. Okay, guys. Well, Big Jeff, do you have any comment?
Well, just in closing, it's incredible how, when put on the stand under oath, they admitted to much of the shenanigans that they were up to. Imagine if Stephen gets his retrial. Some of those people get put on the stand under oath under penalty of perjury, not knowing what Zellner's going to pull out next. We could hear about more of the shenanigans that actually happened with regard to the planting of much of the evidence in Stephen's case, and I look very much forward to that.
Correct. And that thank you, Big Jeff. And that is precisely why they're blocking Kathleen Zellner. I mean, look, she's got an army of fellow attorneys. They would have done mock trials themselves, right? That's what they do. They do mock trials, right? They ask questions, they anticipate answers, they've got all the documentation, they're ready to go. And look how bad this looked for in Brendan's post-conviction. You could imagine what's going to happen in Stevens if he ever gets that chance. The whole strategy will become unraveled, especially to put Culhane and Eisenberg back on the stand and have strategic questions asked of them. Oh, it'll be awesome. All right, guys. Well, look, I'd like to thank the panel for all their excellent questions. I'd like to thank Jay Jacks as a guest researcher. Thank you so much for your comments. They were very illuminating and they really helped the discussion. So, guys, let's go through the panel and let's see if we have any final comments. Bibi, do you have any final comments?
Yeah, sure. I want to thank everyone for coming and hope you enjoy your weekend. And you can meet us in Discord in a little bit here. Brendan's part of the trial is the most sorriest part of the trial. I feel horrible for him.
Yes.
I have a hard time even talking about it, reading about it, or anything else. It makes me feel very hopeless.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you, Bibi. It's as bad as it gets. Big Jeff, do you have any final comments?
No, I just that comment I just made was my final comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Big Jeff. Jay Jacks, do you have any comments?
No, first, thanks for allowing me to speak my mind and share a little bit of what I've dug into over the past 4 years, whatever. But
fantastic.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. We've covered a lot of ground. I would certainly like to see more ground covered on these hearings that I think a lot of people
Yes.
just do not understand of what they did and how freaking awful it really is. That's pretty much it.
Yes. No question. Thank you, J-Jax. I think the 2010 post-conviction hearing are critical. Sammy, do you have a comment?
Neverly is asking, maybe too late for a quick question, but why was Laura Knightrider chosen to present Brand on Bonk versus,
Oh, yes, I do. Panel, does anyone have any comments about why Knightrider presented? Because I remember one of the judges asked this very tricky question about, so did the state want 2 murderers, did they? And that really threw Knightrider big time. Obi-Wan, do you have any comments? Thank you, Neverly.
Well, it depends on what point in time within the case. I mean, what is she actually asking? Like, when what
at the
point is it?
unbunk?
Well, this is this. I think Stephen Drizzen thought that this was her time to shine. This case was hers. He was handing it over to her. He wanted. I mean, of course, I don't think it was the right choice. I think he should have taken a hold of this and fought this aspect of the case. But obviously, he felt that it was her time. He wanted her. I mean, she's already had experiences under this, and in fact, this would have been her first on Bonk review, I'm guessing, and he just wanted her to take over.
Yes. Yeah, but I don't think she anticipated how dirty it was going to get.
Right.
That got really nasty. Big Jeff, do you have a comment?
I do. The question deserves a direct answer. It only could have been Drizzen's call to let Laura Knightrider go in there because Drizzen was the lead attorney.
Yes.
So it had to have been his call. And there are people who suggest that, maybe there was shenanigans there. I don't know. I haven't dealt enough with that. Certainly all roads lead back to Peg Lautenschlager and
yes,
all of these people with the Wisconsin law community is a very small place. Drizzen is a very preeminent member of it. There's no doubt he was serving on panels and whatnot with some of those people.
Correct.
And we will. I don't think we're ever going to know if there was any shenanigans there. I don't think we're ever going to know.
Yes. Thank you, Big Jeff. Kelly, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to echo. I was just going to echo what BB said. Just thank everyone for coming. And then just join us in Discord. As for the question that was answered, I'm just going to say exactly what Big Jeff said. I think this was Steve's decision, and he chose for Laura to take the stand and do it. Next week will be interesting when we touch base on Ken, only for the simple fact that I can add a little bit of flavour to that, being the fact that I've actually had direct contact with him and his sexting scandal. So I can add a little bit of a finishing touch.
Kelly, would you like to run the podcast next week?
No, thank you. But so next week should be a bit interesting, so I can let the viewers know where his head's still at regarding his own sexing scandal. So that will be our next week discussion, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Now, Kelly, you don't happen to be tall and blonde by any chance?
Blonde, yes. Tall, medium height, yeah. And yes, I do wear high heels.
Oh my Lord. Okay, well, we're all looking forward to next week, that's for sure. Christy, do you have any final comments?
Yeah, I'm ruling against her. She's absolutely taken over next week's podcast.
Yes, I think I might step back a little bit.
I think she would be the perfect one.
I'm going to put on a helmet and enjoy the show. Yes, I mean, next week we delve into Ken Kratz, and oh yeah, he's still at it big time. But yes, thank you, Christy.
Did you make an extra therapy appointment for next week? We're doing a lot of talking about Ken Kratz these last few days, you and I. I think we should schedule extra therapy appointments this week.
We need group therapy. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
But still,
maybe you guys can get a Groupon.
Maybe. Oh, there you go. Group rate.
Definitely.
Groupon group rate. There you go.
Definitely. Thank you, Christy. Millbilly, do you have any final comments?
Oh, not really. No. It's just like to thank everybody for supporting everything we are all doing.
Yes, a very good point. And please, guys, check out Millbilly's excellent YouTube channel. Millbilly does a lot of excellent analysis, especially on the law enforcement calls, as well as other parts of the case. Please check out his channel, support him. He's an excellent researcher. Obi-Wan, do you have any final comments?
Yeah, I mean, we touched base on the accountability aspect, and I just want people to get involved, know your constitutional rights, and I think people need to get involved in their communities and try to, I don't know, create. I mean, people have the right to create bills, and I think that they should do something with this official oppression or official immunity toward. I mean, these members of the state. I think they definitely they shouldn't have that type of bill where they can evade prosecution. Yes. So something needs to definitely be done about that. But I want to thank for everybody who joined and participated, and hope to see you on Discord. Thanks.
Correct. Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, you're correct. I mean, the judges are protected. You're never going to resolve these issues. If they've got inbuilt protection and lawyers protect each other, as you'll see next week when we look at what Ken Kratz did, then you're not going to get any resolution. It's going to be the same old problems taking place. And in effect, this case or these two cases are really a probe into the whole judicial system in Wisconsin. It's huge. So that's why, in effect, they're trying to block Kathleen Zellner, because I think a lot of home truths are going to come out, and it won't be good. It's going to be ugly. All right, guys. Well, look, I'd like to thank the panel for their excellent contribution and comments. And we're very fortunate to have Jay Jacks with his insight, especially into the 2010 post-conviction hearings. That's awesome. And guys, of course, we like to thank you, our listeners. Thank you for all your comments. Thank you for subscribing. A thumbs up if you like what we do. If you don't, please let us know why, and we'll try and improve the very best we can. We probably have, I would say, maybe 1 or 2 more podcasts left in the series. And let us know what you would like us to do next, whether you would like us to go the MAM 2 in a similar fashion. MAM 2, of course, is more about the forensics. So it's more looking into the case in a much more detailed fashion. And it's looking more into what happened with Brendan and also with Kathleen Zellner and her experts. Let us know if you would like us to tackle that one. Again, guys, I'd like to thank you all, and we'll catch you all next week. Thank you so much.
This has been
Bye, everybody.
a production.